Now a very interesting session, and we work with Paul Steiger on this headline, on the topic, so how to finance investigative journalism. On your printed program, you could see Christine Raffenson, so the spokesperson, but in fact the #2 of WikiLeaks. He was scheduled as speaker, but you also read yesterday that the extradition of Julian Assange was authorized by the High Court in the UK. For this reason, Christine cancelled his participation. And so thank you very much to Giannina Segnini, a very brilliant, very thorough investigative journalist who accepted to moderate this panel. So I'm asking Giannina to come on board. And so we are 15 minutes late, but this session will last the scheduled time. Thank you. Giannina.
Thank you, Bertrand. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We have a tough question to approach this afternoon, and that is how to finance investigative journalism. Who and how is going to pay for that? Which is also related to the question of who is going to pay for democracy, especially in some parts of the world. We will also explore on different business models to make investigative journalism sustainable. And it is my pleasure to introduce you, our panelists for this session. We have Edwy Plenel. He's the founder and editor-in-chief of Mediapart in France. Welcome, Edwy. We have Howard Finberg, Director of Interactive Learning at Poynter Institute. And we have Paul Steiger, Editor-in-Chief, CEO and President of ProPublica in the US. Welcome, Paul. So we will start with a question, general question, so we can start discussion from there. And that is related to the belief that investigative journalism is expensive, time-consuming, and based on that belief, many media outlets are not investing in investigative journalism. But as many of you have proven with your own projects, a team of journalists working on investigative journalism always produce high quality and high impact pieces, stories, and that is precisely what enhances credibility. And credibility is the business core of any news organization. So why is it that that investigative journalism pays off in such a way? Media outlets are not investing enough on investigative journalism. Edwy.
Ce serait plutôt aux invités, mais... In French, I prefer. How to finance investigative.
How to finance investigative.
C'est d'expliquer.
It's all about explaining that it cannot be financed. You can't finance investigative journalism if you're the owner of weapons or fighting planes that will prevent you from combating corruption, hidden commissions, and the like. When it comes to sales, in a country such as France in particular, which is amongst the top 5 arms mongers around the world, you can't finance investigative journalism if you are owned by the Rothschild or Lazar Bank investment banks that stand at the heart of the financial crisis. of the discussions and the reasons for this financial crisis, the hidden accounts, concealed bankruptcies, the opacity of the world of finance. You cannot finance investigative journalism if you are the owner of the #1 store in luxury, with all the issues related to advertisement contracts when you reveal information, shattering one of the groups at the heart of the luxury industry, and I'm referring to L'Oreal with the Bettencourt case. You cannot finance investigative journalism if you own the largest group in France and one of the biggest in the world in the field of public works and construction, which is at the heart of all the contracts signed by local authorities, elected representatives, and the clientelism that goes along with the public works, civil works, and public construction sector. You cannot put at the heart of public television investigative journalism as a prime time issue if the owners of public television are appointed by the head of state directly without any other form of control, preventing public television from legitimately putting at prime time cases concerning a president of the republic during his term or who was recently in office. I'm starting a sort of serious opening joke, just quite simply to describe my stance with respect to the media in France, a low-intensity democracy in that respect. The cultural conditions, the ecological conditions and prerequisites for our job to be independent are not widespread. They're not there. Our sector is dominated by widespread conflicts of interest regarding private or public media. That has consequences in terms of the hierarchy of information and on the determination of newsrooms and the choices made. I often say that Mediapart, which was at the heart of all the revelations over the past 5 years in France, all the state affairs or economic affairs, when you hear that you're very brave because you are right, it's all about trust. I say it's a compliment that comes and is received as a pleasure, but also makes you feel pity. Why is it that the journalist who normally does his job should need to be brave? We're just a small fry in a big sea packed with sharks. And the problem is that that sea is polluted. The first and foremost issue facing all our democracies is that we as journalists, publishers, we must foster the right conditions to depollute the oceans. The second point in my response, and here I come from a different stance, not from that of France, but I'm referring to a laboratory for a digital, independent press, participative, putting investigations at the heart of its culture. This laboratory, which is Mediapart. How can you finance investigative journalism? My answer is quite simple, and Mediapart is proof of the pudding. Via the electors. The digital revolution has shattered the overall information economy. First of all, we are talking to readers who know of all sorts of information, and we don't need to bother them with that. It's there, free, offered on all the different media. High-quality journalism, a benchmark journalism, a citizen journalism, must focus on added value. And what more does it provide in all these streams of instantaneity in terms of information, what will really make the difference in the best interests of the public? I often quote in French, translated, what Rosa Ezra Park said in News as a Form of Knowledge. Robert Park was a journalist for many years and the founder of the Chicago School of Sociology, carrying out fundamental work on journalism since the start of the 20th century. And he said, and I still believe this, that the journalist who brings in information of the public interest, never heard of, that surprises the audience, forcing the public to move, to change, to discuss, that journalist is a far more efficient reformer than an editorialist who is there screaming out loud from his tribune. Much more so than a commentator or a journalist who just looks and who is redundant with respect to information already given by the public authorities. So with the digital information economy, Mediapart is showing that we can put on one column everything that's already known in the stream and that all citizens should be aware of and focus rather on added value. Added value means first and foremost this investigative journalism. Mediapart in 4 years' time has managed to become profitable. Mediapart doesn't carry any advertising. Mediapart lives only from subscriptions from its public. Mediapart last year had 5 million euros in sales and profits of 11% of sales, a profit of 570,000 euros. Now we're at 70, we have 70,000 subscribers with 1,500,000 web users. It's very small, of course, as compared to the big media companies here, but it's a laboratory that's open to all of you. It is a laboratory made for the pure players, created by journalists to fight against the depression facing our profession, showing that information can create value. Our work can create value. In that respect, and I will stop there in my introduction, for me, it's not just a matter of how to finance investigative journalism. The real issue is how to put it at the real heart of the issue, how to make the priority. And this raises questions for economic model and our editorial culture. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Edwy, for your comments. Paul, why do you think that media outlets are not investing enough on doing investigative journalism if we all know that it enhances credibility?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think that it
you have to. Whoops. Yes.
I think you must
take a minute.
Okay. How's that? All right. I think that's an excellent question, and it devolves from something that Edwy said, which is that the web has totally scrambled the business model and economic environment in which journalism operates. I understand the U.S. situation much better than I understand the situation in Europe or elsewhere in the world. In the U.S., the newspaper industry in particular, but related serious journalism as well, has suffered a tremendous decline in the growth of its revenues. In some cases, diminution of revenues and losses. Multiple companies are in bankruptcy. Some have stopped publishing in print except for a couple of days a week, and some have stopped publishing in print altogether. And at the same time, there's tremendous advantages and excitement from what can be delivered through the digital media. And but what this means is that investigative reporting that contributed to the popular impression of the media and contributed to its wealth in the previous environment the costs are so great that people are not willing to take the kind of risks they took before. It doesn't mean that investigative reporting has disappeared from the integrated media. The New York Times recently did one of its best investigative stories in years about Walmart, covering up bribery in Mexico. You know, a terrific story, but even it is doing less. The big newspapers in the U.S., the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the L.A. Times, the Chicago Tribune, are still doing some, but they're not able to finance as much. And I expect that process to continue. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, the New Orleans Times Picayune, which is owned by Newhouse, one of the strongest chains, announced that it's shutting down its print production for all but a few days a week, Sunday and I think Friday and Wednesday. Otherwise, you get it only online. And I think that for the last several years, everybody's been anticipating a fall-off in print advertising, which has been sustaining newspapers. I think you're now going to see it accelerate, and so the challenge of getting more and more of your revenue from online is going to be greater rather than less. So how do we replace what's lost? ProPublica is one approach where what we say to charitable givers, big and small, that for 40 years you didn't need to give donations to support investigative reporting. Now, if you want to have as much of it as you did before, if you want to have as much as you need, if you want to have the kind of reporting that produces the revelations in the Betancourt case that Mediapart generated, then you may have to contribute just as you contribute to hospitals and museums and ballet companies and universities. And we've been getting a response. We have a budget of $10 million, and initially we had one set of funders that helped us launch. They were terrific people, Herb and Marion Sandler, but now we're getting half of our revenues from other than them, and that is a process we expect to see continue. We're looking at the possibility of subscriptions, but we need to make all of our stuff accessible. It's all accessible at our website. And so the challenge is to figure out how to keep in the conversation and how to find a variety of sources of revenues. But we feel that investigative reporting is significant enough for democracy that it's worth supporting in multiple ways, including by charitable contributions. The newspapers and television will still do some. The distributed journalism will do more. We now have to live in an environment which I think is exciting and challenging, of an ecosystem for journalism that provides opportunities and risks and challenges of a sort we never saw in the previous 4 decades. And I'm delighted to be part of the solution in the U.S., but I recognize that there have to be multiple solutions.
Thank you, Paul. Before starting with you, what are those other revenues that you just mentioned? Half of your revenue come from donations, and the other half, what are those?
No, 90% of our revenues come from donations, but more than 90% of our revenues come from donations, but half come from one donor, the Sandler Foundation. The rest is a variety of foundations, public and private in the U.S., philanthropists who give anywhere from several $100,000 to $10,000 or $20,000, and then thousands of people that give small sums on our website. We also, unlike Mediapart, we do take advertising. It is not generating much revenue so far. And we take some of our reporting and combine it into short book form and sell it for a very cheap price. I think it is $1.99 on Amazon as e-books, and that is producing a small amount of revenue. And there are other things that we look at. We've considered syndication, but we haven't done that yet because we want broad distribution of our work.
Thank you. Howard?
Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this discussion. Although the Poynter Institute, as many of you know, is a school for journalists. It's a training institute, and it also is a research center. And so I bring a slightly different perspective. We do not have our own investigative journalists, but we have many journalists who are teachers who have done investigation. And the conversation so far is interesting, but I wonder if I could raise it up, as we call the ladder of abstraction, and talk about two things. One is I wonder if we're at a point now where the value added that we talk about in terms of that investigative journalism has provided traditional media outlets is really morphing into what the future of journalism is going to be, in the sense that all journalism will be investigative, as it was in its original inception, to as a way of investigating or finding out something that was hidden or unknown. In many respects, I think we, in my 40 years of the business, we grew up with the notion that you needed a special team to investigate wrongdoings and to uncover. I think that if journalism is going to survive, and it needs to survive for the sake of democracy, then we need to instill the practice of investigation, uncovering into almost all of our journalism, and not draw that distinction that there's something special about investigative journalism. Now, clearly there are special projects, deeper, more intensive ways of uncovering stories. There always have been that, and there always will be, and we truly admire the journalists who can uncover major issues and for the public good. But I raise this point because it sort of goes to the title of this panel, which is about the sustainability of investigative journalism. And what both of our panelists have talked about so far is, in a sense, the sustainability of journalism. And this is our biggest challenge, and that we have heard of Paul's description of the variety of the ways that you're looking at funding your journalism is the challenge that I think everybody in this room faces. And this is what we need to recognize as we look at what do we want to keep at the end of the day? What is important to us as journalists, and how will we fund that journalism? I think the tale of economic woe that started in the U.S. 10 years ago is truly going to continue to ripple. The Times-Picayune in New Orleans going to 3 days a week from 7 days a week is in what sometimes is referred to as a canary in the coal mine. I think we're going to see more of that. When probed about 18 months ago in a survey by the Pew Research Center, editors and news directors of television stations were 50-50 in terms of their optimism and about whether their product would survive 10 years from now. I wonder if they may be less optimistic now. However, not wishing to end on a pessimistic note, that actually I think this is the golden age for journalism because of the growth of the independent journalists, the entrepreneur journalists. And we can find ways to support multiple flowers in the sort of decimated forest of big media companies, that we actually may have lots of voices that will provide us to journalism. You know, I'm also a realist to know that finding those voices is sometimes provides great difficulty for the public at large. How do we get our voices heard above the din of just the commentators? So in many respects that the economic models facing all of journalism are the same issue when it comes to supporting investigative journalism, and that we need to find ways that are clearly much more creative. An example of something I recently heard was that in terms of even online, it's going to be increasingly difficult for traditional media companies to support their operation, with 68% of online advertising, online display advertising in the US actually being controlled by the 5 big tech firms: Yahoo, Microsoft, Google, AOL, Facebook. And then in about 2-3 years, about 20% will be controlled by Facebook alone. That's display advertising. So, I mean, our difficulties are fairly well documented, so we need to start looking for some solutions that are different. And so I think this is something that is important to journalism as a whole and not just investigative journalism.
Thank you. I have a philosophical question, and that is, who must pay for investigative journalism? The reader, foundations and NGOs, the states, the governments? Who is the one who has to pay for this? Your case is amazing because our readers are supporting the whole operation, and ProPublica's case is different. Our donators are supporting the entire, almost the entire operation. But besides the reality that you're having right now, who do you think should pay, I mean, for democracy and investigative journalism?
Okay, okay. Yes, okay. Je suis entièrement.
I fully agree with what Howard Finberg said. My answer to your question is it must be the public, readers. But behind that question, there's another collective response, not about investigative journalism, but on the crisis of our industries, our professions. Journalism in the age of the digital revolution. I said we are a laboratory. ProPublica is also a laboratory. So to say that facing this crisis with logics based on streams, flow, uniformity, conformism, to do what ProPublica does, long-lasting, very deep investigations financed in a culture of non-profit organizations, a politically liberal culture that is very impossible to find in our continental regions. But time has gone by since, and I believe that what Mediapart has shown is of relevance to all of you. Our initial conviction was not about investigative journalism. We illustrated that for the journalists at Mediapart in the existing press, Le Monde, Libération, for example, and other media for those who have joined us. The real initial conviction was the refusal of something free, That was in 2008. No one believed it at the time. There was the conviction that we were making a blunder, a bit like the speculative bubbles in the world of finance with respect to the digital revolution. We were running behind a model which was not that of information in the public interest. It was a model based on audience, the model used by television and radio. We all know that. Radio and television, they don't live from information first and foremost. They live from entertainment. And they can give information, but it's from entertainment that they get a readership or a listenership, the crowd, the mass. A public interest information that will disturb, surprise, requires not an audience, but a public.
Walter Lippmann, John Dewey, Robert Park, I quote this man before. It's a real debate. Public ou audience? Masse où on veut...
Okay, mass, bringing together the largest numbers, or a public, is that it? Loyalty, subscription, with feelings. And behind this we have the issues regarding the conception of democracy. The race for freeness leads to the destruction of content. Ultimately, there may be times where there may be a bit of money, but ultimately by definition, because advertising does not have the same value in digital media because it calls for logics based on large numbers, meaning gathering, people, superficiality. So to defend not only investigative journalism, but what it represents, which is at the heart of our profession, added value of information with respect to communication strategy, for me that means choosing acceptance by the public, contribution by the public. So the question about the business model has an impact on content. I'd just like to conclude with a story that I was thinking of for the English speakers or non-French speakers. Most of our stories at Mediapart are translated into English. When I say it's not a matter of money, but it's a matter of will, I will take an example that's on your continent in Colombia. In one of the important cases in France today, involving the secret causes for the Libyan war, corruptions between those who surrounded the former president of the Republic and Gaddafi's dictatorship, we revealed the offshore accounts, the companies in Liechtenstein or Bahamas financing the personal enrichment of someone close to Nicolas Sarkozy, and who was in charge of his department, Le Hauts-de-Seine, Mr. Thierry Robert. We found that that friend had a huge finca in Colombia. We have the major Colombian and American military bases. A finca worthy of a Brazilian telenovela, because an episode of Mafioso, well, they filmed that at that finca in Brazil. We're a small newspaper. We don't have more than 30 full-time journalists, that's all. And nevertheless, we bought tickets to go there for 4 or 5 days to speak with the Colombian police that is now dealing with letters regulatory. Filming, meeting people, understanding why these Frenchmen had chosen this remote area. And we discovered, I don't know about the interpreters how they can deal with this, one was called El Nibar and the other was called El Nichon. Well, these are words in French which mean a woman's breasts. What they call the rising stars. We are the star of a reality in corruption that goes well beyond your imagination. We did that story, we carried the story last November. Not a single French television channel or any major French media that can afford to pay for 15 days of storytelling in Colombia sent a team over there. And it's now 8 months later on. That's why I'm saying that's not a matter of money. It's first and foremost a matter of the ecosystem, culture, and defending the heart of our profession.
Could I chime in on this? I think that there is a fundamental disjunction that explains why investigative reporting or accountability reporting, I mean, I know all reporting should be investigative, but particularly when we're talking about big projects that expose information that people want to keep secret, and they have the tools to keep them secret, you know, lawsuits and obscuring of data and various other things that requires major effort over a period of weeks or months to penetrate. Much of journalism can be financed by its readers, either directly or indirectly. Readers paying for it, or readers accepting advertising and as part of the package. And that is the model that worked very well for my 40 years in print journalism. You know, at the Wall Street Journal, which I edited for 16 years, much of the content was stuff that people felt they needed to know. You know, what was happening to interest rates, what was happening to employment, which companies were performing well, which companies were performing badly. They needed that information to do their jobs, and so they were happy to pay for the newspaper, and the newspaper was so profitable that it could also afford to do a certain amount of investigative reporting, which in turn enhanced the paper's reputation. But if you look at who benefits from this kind of reporting, it goes way beyond the readers. Example, one of the stories that ProPublica's reporters did proved that the board in the state of California was taking as long as 6 years. The board that licenses nurses was taking as long as 6 years to take the license away from nurses who had beaten up their patients, or had stolen drugs from their patients, or had been zonked out on drugs when their patients had critical care issues. So we had dead patients, permanently disabled patients, traumatized patients. But when the nurses were fired, they would take their license, drive a mile and a quarter to another hospital, show the license, and get a new job and start the whole process all over again. Well, we partnered with the Los Angeles Times, the biggest paper in California. They put the story on their front page on a Sunday. On Monday, the governor fired a majority of the board and replaced them with people who he told to fix the problem. And indeed, they're moving much faster in scrutinizing nurses who misbehave. That has contributed to improved health care for every citizen in California, way beyond the number of people who bought the Los Angeles Times. This is what economists call an externality. In other words, it's a benefit that accrues to other than the people who pay for the product. There are also negative externalities, as when companies pollute. You know, they make us bear some of their costs instead of bearing the costs on their own. That's why the financing of this kind of journalism requires a different approach. Your approach is very smart, and we will study that for lessons. Our approach is working in the U.S. It requires in the new environment all kinds of new mechanisms, taking advantage of digital techniques and the interest of the public out there to help. So there are many opportunities here. I don't mean to suggest it's depressing or negative. It's not. There are many, many opportunities. But the financing has got to be different than it was.
Yeah, I would agree that the financing is going to be different. It's already driven some people like the Times-Picayune out of business because they can't finance journalism based on advertising because advertising is not there. But on the other hand, an organization like the Texas Tribune, I'm sure you know Texas Tribune, they get a lot of their revenue from events, and in addition to other subscriptions and donations and the like. It is going to be a revenue mix. But you asked the question about who's going to pay, whether the public was going to pay. I think the signs are that a certain segment of the public will pay, which is the good news. The bad news is that a great deal of the public will not pay, does not have the interest to pay, does not have the wherewithal to pay, or does not understand the inherent value that journalism provides, the externality, as you put it. If we need to do a better job as journalists explaining the value of journalists so that the public will pay, and why this is good for them to have us do what it is that we do. Right now, about 10% of the U.S. Newspaper market is on paywalls. That's about 150 papers. About another 100 will go behind paywalls by the end of the year is the estimate that I have. And I think you're going to see that trend continue. Now that does raise some question about what's left, what's outside the paywall. Is that the investigative journalism is outside the paywall, or is it inside the paywall? I mean, the challenge is, as Paul pointed out, is that if we don't do this, people die. To put it in a very simplistic way, that if journalism isn't there to protect people who can't protect themselves, then people will get hurt. You know, lives will be lost. And so, you know, this is not just a matter of economics to keep jobs. This is about economics that in a sense supports democracy. And so if I feel passionate about anything, I feel passionate that we need more experiments. We need more subscription models. We need more donation models. We need more ways. But we also need to figure out how we can tell the public of the value of what investigative journalism does directly to them and get them to understand, even if they don't support it financially, they can support it in other ways. Thank you.
Edwy, you were describing an amazing loyalty. I mean, this is really new for me to see how can you make people encourage in the project, and this loyalty is not easy to see. We, in the investigative unit in La Nación, every time we run a story about how the government is spending the budget and all these public interests stories, the night before I pray for the health of Lionel Messi, because if I run the story today and something happens to his knee, at the end of the day, you know, the public is going to switch from our story immediately to any Messi story or Lady Gaga or whatever it is. So this is just to say that we are not charging for information, but it's inspiring. How did you achieve this loyalty? I mean, what are you doing different? Are you doing the same traditional investigative journalism that we all know, or you're changing some parts of the original formula, let's say writing different, telling the stories in a different way, more compelling? What's the...
Nous essayons tout.
We try everything we can. Everything that the digital revolution permits. I came from traditional journalism, from paper, print. The founders of Mediapart, well, renowned, and I worked for 25 years at Le Monde, where I practiced investigative reporting, shaking up some professional traditions in our country. What happened then? What happens was that we came from this press facing a crisis, a closed press with a beginning and end, limits, signs were there. It was on top of its public, on an ivory tower without seeing the public. And the press article is there as an end in itself. In this shift to digital, which took place at a time when in journalism schools you had people who claimed that there was one form of writing for digital, one alone. You had to be brief and concise, no more than 2 sheets. You had to stay with that logics of constant, permanent updating and streaming. We had an analog data. Mediapart is a newspaper, but fully digital, taking from the modern technology the best of our traditions. So what have we discovered? First of all, that in digital, it's a documented form of journalism. That's the link at the heart of the digital revolution. When you publish an inquiry, an investigation, you publish your documents. We created French leaks after publication, and after the documents that we found have been exploited, we returned them back to the public. Open data, a documentary database. So that journalism proves things, bringing the evidence, bringing the documents. That's the first point. Secondly, we discovered to what extent in sensitive investigations that form of journalism was better in terms of letting both parties express themselves. Establishing links between the mail that you receive, pointing out that there's a conflict about our information, making that known. Thirdly, we discovered the issues that are important to create that sense of trust and loyalty. It's a journal, it's a newspaper, but it's also a club, a participative media, where all of Mediapart subscribers can contribute and discuss, and anyone can come and read, because that's not something to be paid for. And when there's a debate around a piece of information, we're no longer above the readers, we're at the same level. And an opinion debate on our information belongs to the public. We don't have the last word. This week, we released information that's disturbing for the Socialist Party, which now has the president of the Republic, on expenses accounts used by the public authorities. It's not only the socialists, it's all the elected representatives in France, like in the UK, where there's an uncontrolled use that's discretionary of over 7,000 euros of monthly expenses. Some readers aren't happy, so we answer, we discuss. So I could multiply the examples. We also have live operations. We have discovered to what extent the cost of digital television and the quality is much lower, that was said here, and it's much less expensive than 2 years ago. So tomorrow evening there will be a public debate that's open to all about our information. It was said it's all about being pedagogical about our work. To be clear, for me, digital means a new form of youth. Fundamentally, we can defend the best traditions with resources that we do not have in print.
So much. We have only 10 minutes left, so we'll open up for questions from the audience. Xavier.
On a célébré
in Hong Kong, ProPublica success was celebrated. Today I'd like to celebrate the success of Mediapart. When I discovered Mediapart 2 years ago, they were still fighting to survive and to carry through with its project. I would like to celebrate this event for 2 reasons. First of all, because of the triumph of digital journalism, and secondly, the triumph of a true journalism, investigative journalism, I mean. But my question for Edwy Plenel, above and beyond my congratulations, is that you are disturbing. You bothered. You disturbed some. You defied the political status quo in France, but you also defied the journalistic status quo in this country. Could you tell us more about the reactions you have encountered? You spoke about the silence of the major television channels, but the newspapers in this country, did they ignore you, disregard you or not? When you spoke of the quotation case, and when you carried out your recent investigations, what was the reaction of the establishment regarding journalists and colleagues? Do I have to answer that question? No. I said it in the beginning. Paul and Ward said this. You can't dissociate journalism from democracy, from our social accountability as regards democracy. I have the feeling that I'm doing normal things. I'm not disturbing. I'm doing what's at the heart of our profession. And this is why I quoted, references back dating from the intellectual debate in the United States on journalism. I often play around in presentations in France, quoting Pulitzer about the fact that you have to control how the rich pay their taxes and give names. That's how we started, and you all know that. Whistleblowing. I get the feeling that for the past 35 years now, I'm defending something that stands at the heart of our profession. The answer lies in the question. Be it with respect to the crisis that affected Le Monde when I was the chief editor, which led to my resignation and my departure, or also the way, not journalists, because the profession shows a lot of solidarity, but the establishment, I must say that, yes, indeed, there are obstacles. There's a lack of solidarity, a lack of curiosity. For me, it's not a matter of personal accountability, but it's about our common culture. I experienced that, well, under other circumstances, and I'm experiencing it today with Mediapart. I won't complain. I believe that the virtue lies in example, and after a while, we will make progress. A year ago, exactly, Mediapart made revelations that went around the globe, based on a clandestine announcement made by a whistleblower about discrimination in French football. And the heads of French football wanted to make the football team innocent, white, more blacks, less Arabs. We did that. That information was announced around the world because football, as like Lady Gaga, she goes around the world. Here, she was taken, well, very gently. And it's very interesting because on that opportunity, at that occasion, we discovered how football is commented by journalists who are also fully involved in football. I mean that there are financial issues at stake that are very significant. It was an issue of public interest. Everyone understood that around the world. I think that you should have simple, normal reflexes. I often say that we are a laboratory in the public interest. I bought a small dossier. We publish our financial statements and accounts every year. It's all public. We received only 200,000 euros in public grants when we were not profitable, and once we became profitable in 2010, we have not received a cent of public money. We live only from our readers. It's useful for the entire profession. You will not find in any French newspaper in the field of economics, general publications, magazines, any cold-headed survey on the Mediapart model. All of our accounts are public. I've never hidden anything. I always say, come and see, come and look. It's useful for the entire profession. I don't know if the Mediapart model may be mainstreamed. I'm just saying that it shows clearly that our profession can create value. At a time when, for the past 10 years, we have been seeing the destruction of value. I would like the entire profession in my country, first of all, to use this model. Explain it, discuss it. It's right there on the table, open to everyone.
Thank you. I have a few questions following on that. Now your operation is profitable,
yes.
But how
yes.
did you manage to run Mediapart at the very beginning? I mean, how did you pay for the employees and the reporters?
At the outset, I said that we're in a country that has no liberal traditions from the political standpoint of that term. At the outset, we started out with utopia. We said we will find a capitalist, a French investor. We have a team of people who showed that they knew how to create value. When I was at Le Monde from 1994 to 2002, as editor-in-chief, sales at Le Monde increased by 19%. The 5 profitable years at Le Monde was from 1997 to 2002, before the crisis, as you know, which led to its sale. So we had that professional experience. So we'd knock at doors, and I said to myself, okay, Mediapart, we needed 5 million euros. That's nothing. A Russian oligarch in France, with the complicity of the President of the Republic, spent 100,000 euros to kill a journalist at François. 100 million euros in 3 years. We wanted 5. With a charter, a wall, independence. We didn't find it. What did we do then? We took out the debt. We put in our savings. I put my what I got after resigning from when I was fired from Le Monde. So I received an indemnity. We took out debts. We made personal debts that we're still paying back. We found 2 additional investors who were not at all in the press world, and that we plan to buy back in 3 years' time with our profits. And we set up a society of Friends of Mediapart with 88 citizens who invested some money. So that's how we proceeded. We did not want to be entrepreneurs. That was not our objective. We were forced to do so because it was the only way out. The banks who financed ProPublica at the beginning don't exist in France. Finance a newspaper that will be carrying out investigative reporting that will disturb your own spheres. I've never found that in France. Investors in our world is all based on interests. Influence is not about investing in the independence of information. And here I believe that that question, once again, is a topical issue for our democracies. It's not because we have, for 1 century now, acquired these principles on the freedom of information that our ecosystem today is not disturbed in terms of its integrity.
We have another question. The gentleman in the back.
My name is András Lőke. I come from Hungary. And as a person with an organization which enhances investigative journalism in Hungary, I was very much intrigued by the title of this panel, How to Finance Investigative Journalism. In my country, journalists turn to wherever they can for example, our foundation, because the papers and the web-based publications are not ready to really finance in-depth investigative journalism, then we turn to whomever we can, to well-to-do Hungarian individuals and the Soros foundations for our money. Then it was quite clear to me what the two American gentlemen have as sources, like one of them is a part of an educational organization, which is fine, and he also mentioned that it's a part of a model in some other cases to make events. Then ProPublica is financed basically by one rich family plus extra donors. And it was not quite clear to me what Mediapart is financed of, because the words public and the word readers were used in an interchanged way. So is it the taxpayers or is it the readers? If it is the readers, then congratulations, and then it comes up to a new French Revolution, I guess.
Thank you for your comment. You don't have any specific question?
Yeah, what is Mediapart financed of?
Okay.
Mediapart.
If I understand your question correctly, Mediapart lives only from its reader subscriptions, only from its reader subscriptions. They pay monthly or annually for their subscriptions. There's no other source of income at Mediapart.
Okay, last one.
Yeah, I'm Justice Karju. I'm chairman of the Press Council of India, formerly a judge of the Supreme Court of India. Firstly, I want to praise Mr. Edwy Plenel. He's a brave man. We need more journalists like him. And in India, unfortunately, the media has been totally commercialized. 80% of our 1,200 million people are living on $0.50 a day. But 90% media coverage, both electronic media and print media, shows lives of film stars, which film star is having an affair with whom, which film star has become pregnant, fashion parades, you know, cricket. So I said, you see, the media is behaving like Queen Mary Antoinette, that if the people do not have bread, give them cakes. So, Mr. Plenel, while I sympathize with you, but the media has been totally commercialized. I'm sorry to say the profit motive is a dominant motive, so I don't see how you can get out of it. Thank you. I'd like your comments on that.
Okay.
Très vite, parce que je crois.
To be brief, because I think we'll have to stop shortly, I think that question is as old as our profession. We've always had that polarization between public interest information on the one hand and entertainment on the other. It's all about putting at the center of our public debate this information. Quality press, a real press, was never dominant. What creates the digital revolution is a battle. The model based on entertainment, would it corrupt or dominate the information model? What I am noting is that the old press industry, given the panic about this economic model, they have yielded to the entertainment model in terms of editorial and an economic standpoint with this free model. So I urge the profession to remain very much anchored in the world based on the model of information and its value. The independence of journalism has a price because it is of democratic utility. We must all defend that. If we do not defend it today, we will be washed away by the logics of entertainment.
Okay, with that passionate sentence, we are finishing this panel. I want to thank our panelists, Edwy, Paul, and Howard. And I'm pretty sure that we will be available to answer more questions later on. Thank you so much.